Good morning, seniors. Today we're going to be going over Chapter 2 of Lord of the Flies and also working on the Chapter 2 notes. And I also want to work on the Chapter 1 and 2 table that says Savagery and Civilization. There's a few things that we could put down on there. I'm going to give you a few, but then I want you to continue filling it out as we read, or if I miss something in Chapter 1, go ahead and add something, and then when we're done with Chapter 2, we'll add a few as well. But again, it's the one that has this big chart on it. At the top it says Chapter 1 and 2. And let's read through what it's asking us to do. Considering the characters, symbols, setting, etc., what we've seen so far, which aspects of the story represent the structure of civilization, and which ones represent the pull towards savagery? Sample topics: the conch shell, the signal fire, Ralph, the beastie, Piggy, Jack, the island itself, nature, wildlife, the meeting, hunters, killing pigs. So there's a few things that we could already say. Let's start with savagery. I would say the island itself is a representation of savagery. It is, there's no humans before the boys, and it's described as things that, it's described as, what am I looking for? Like the words creepers that represent all the branches that make it hard to walk through the jungle. A jungle in itself can be considered savage as it's difficult to live in and get through. It's hot and uncomfortable. The lagoon, the tide, all of these things could be considered a little more savage than modern day civil. I would also say hunting as well. It's more savage characteristic, and so Jack and the hunters could go in that category of savagery. If you go to the right-hand column, civilization, these are things more associated with Piggy and Ralph. For example, voting for a leader. So the meeting would be civil. Let's come together. Let's look at a problem and fix it. Assigning roles. Jack, Ralph, and Simon will go see if the island's full. Piggy, you take names, etc. The conch shell that is used to assemble everybody. So that is also civilization. Let's see if we can add to that. Also, if you take out the other, the Chapter 2 questions, Chapter 2 charts, leadership qualities. I filled some of these in from Chapter 1. I'd like you to fill them in as well. But let's start with Piggy. On the left-hand side, good qualities. What are qualities that make Piggy a good leader? Well, as the book said, and as we've already seen, all the decent ideas that have happened so far in the book have come from Piggy. Found the conch shell. Let's use it to call everybody together. Let's take names. Let's figure this out. So all those good decisions that have been made have come from Piggy. The shell, the assembly, etc. Bad qualities, right off the bat, he is not respected. And if you are not respected, it would be difficult for people to listen to you and therefore not make you a good leader. Under Piggy is Jack, left-hand side. What are good qualities? What are good leadership qualities? Well, right away it says that he has the charisma, all the qualities that you would expect of a good leader. And then I would also say a good leadership role is that he's very authoritative. He just takes those reins and he makes those decisions. However, on the right-hand side, the negative qualities is that he's a bully. You don't really want a bully as a leader. He seems to have a bit of a temper, which we'll see a little more as we go on. And he wants the power, especially when he decides that he wants to be a hunter. However, we saw in Chapter 1 that he was not able to hunt. Ralph, the third character, good qualities. He's very likable. Everybody seems to listen to him and want to be around him. Other than that, he doesn't have many great qualities yet. He did make the decision to go check out the island, so he did make decisions. On the right hand side, negative qualities. Well, most of the good things that happened did not come from him, but he did take credit for them. Also, he seems to want to appease Jack, make Jack happy, because Jack did not win the leadership role. So, who knows if he'll take that too far or not. So while we're reading chapter 2, I want you to look at the worksheet at the top. Says 4120, chapter 2 notes. And the first thing we're going to look at is what new rule does Ralph establish in chapter 2? Why is it important? And then we'll talk about the beastie when we're done reading. So, chapter 2 is entitled Fire on the Mountain. By the time Ralph finished blowing the conch, the platform was crowded. There were differences between this meeting and the one held in the morning. The afternoon sun slanted in from the other side of the platform, and most of the children, feeling too late the smart of sunburn, had put their clothes on. The choir, noticeably less of a group, had discarded their cloaks. Ralph sat on a fallen trunk, his left side to the sun. On his right were most of the choir. On his left, the larger boys who had not known each other before the evacuation. Before him, small children squatted in the grass. Silence now. Ralph lifted the cream and pink shell to his knees, and a sudden breeze scattered light over the platform. He was uncertain whether to stand up or remain sitting. He looked sideways to his left, toward the bathing pool. Peggy was sitting near, but giving no help. So already, he's kind of looking over to Piggy for answers or direction, but Piggy is probably either unaware of this or feeling a little bitter that he was left behind and not doing it. So again, Ralph is relying on Piggy, which could be a negative or positive. Negative if that's his sole reliability, positive if he's willing to listen to what other people have to say. But let's find out. Ralph cleared his throat. Well then, all at once he found he could talk fluently and explain what he had to say. So he's a good communicator. We could add that to our list of positive qualities. Where are you, Ralph? Good communicator. He passed a hand through his fair hair and spoke. We're on an island. We'd been on the mountaintop and seen water all around. We saw no houses, no smoke, no footprints, no boats, no people. We're on an uninhabited island with no other people on it. Jack broke in. All the same, you need an army for hunting pigs. Yes, there are pigs on the island. All three of them tried to convey the sense of the pink live thing struggling in the creepers. We saw. Squealing. It broke away. Before it could kill it, but next time... Jack slammed his knife into a trunk and looked around challengingly. The meeting settled down again. So you see, said Ralph, we need hunters to get us meat. And another thing. He lifted the shell on his knees and looked around the sun-slashed faces. There aren't any grown-ups. We shall have to look after ourselves. The meeting hummed and was silent. And another thing. We can't have everybody talking at once. We'll have to have hands up, like at school. He held the conch before his face and glanced around the mouth. Then I'll give him the conch. Conch? That's what the shell's called. I'll give the conch to the next person to speak. He can hold it when he's speaking. But look, and he won't be interrupted, except by me. Jack was on his feet. We'll have rules, he cried excitedly. Lots of rules. Then when anybody breaks them, wee-you, wacko, bong, doink. Ralph felt the conch lifted from his lap. Then Piggy was standing cradling the great cream shell, and the shouting died down. Jack, left on his feet, looked uncertainly at Ralph, who smiled and patted the log. Jack sat down. Piggy took off his glasses and blinked at the assembly while he wiped them on his shirt. We have our first rule. So let's write that down on our worksheet. What is the new rule? You can only speak at assemblies or at meeting when you're holding the conch shell and you won't be interrupted. And why is this important? Well, a few things. Number one, it's going to keep, um, you're going to be able to be listened to because you're the only one that can speak. And number two, it's still going to keep that civilization that we're going to be talking about. And already, who broke the rule? Jack. All right, moving on. You're hindering Ralph. You're not letting him get to the most important thing. He paused effectively. Who knows we're here, eh? And this is Piggy speaking again, intelligently. They knew at the airport. The man with the trumpet thing. My dad. Piggy put on his glasses. Nobody knows we are, said Piggy. He was paler than before and breathless. Perhaps they knew where we were going to, and perhaps not, but they don't know where we are, 'cause we never got there. He gaped at them for a moment, then swayed and sat down. Ralph took the conch from his hand. That's what I was going to say, he went on. When you all, he gazed at their intent faces. The plane was shot down in flames. Nobody knows where we are. We may be here a long time. The silence was so complete that they could hear the unevenness of Piggy's breathing. The sun slanted in and lay golden over half the platform. The breezes that on the lagoon had chased their tails like kittens were finding their way across the platform and into the forest. Ralph pushed back the tangle of fair hair that hung on his forehead. So we may be here a long time. Nobody said anything. He grinned suddenly. But this is a good island. Jack, Simon, and me, we climbed the mountain. It's a wizard. There's food and drink and rocks. Blue flowers. Piggy, partially recovered, pointed to the conch in Ralph's hands, and Jack and Simon fell silent. Ralph went on. So again, Simon and Jack are talking when they're not supposed to, and Piggy is the one reminding them of the new rule. While we're waiting, we can have a good time on this island. He gesticulated wildly. It's like in a book. At once there was a clamor. Treasure Island, swallows in the Amazons, Coral Island. Ralph waved the conch. This is our island. It's a good island. Until the grown-ups come to fetch us, we'll have fun. Jack held out his hands for the conch. There's pigs, he said. There's food, and bathing water and a little stream along there, and everything. Didn't anyone find anything else? He handed the conch back to Ralph and sat down. Apparently no one had found anything. The older boys first noticed the child when he resisted. There was a group of little boys urging him forward, and he did not want to go. He was a shrimp of a boy, about 6 years old, and one side of his face was blotted out by a mulberry-colored birthmark. He stood now, warped out of the perpendicular by the fierce light of publicity, and he bored into the coarse grass with one toe. He was muttering and about to cry. The other little boys, whispering but serious, pushed him toward Ralph. All right, said Ralph. Come on, then. The small boy looked around in panic. Speak up. The small boy held out his hands for the conch, and the assembly shouted with laughter. At once he snatched back his hands and started to cry. Let him have the conch, shouted Piggy. Let him have it. At last Ralph induced him to hold the shell, but by then the blow of laughter had taken away the child's voice. Piggy knelt by him, one hand on the great shell, listening and interpreting to the assembly. He wants to know what you're going to do about the snake thing. Ralph laughed, and the other boys laughed with him. The small boy twisted further into himself. Tell us about the snake thing. Now he says it was a beastie. Beastie? A snake thing, ever so big. He saw it. Where? In the woods. Either the wandering breezes or perhaps the decline of the sun allowed a little coolness to lie under the trees. The boys felt it and stirred restlessly. You couldn't have a beastie, a snake thing, on an island this size, Ralph explained kindly. You only get them in big countries, like Africa or India. Murmur, and the grave nodding of heads. He said the beastie came in the dark. Then he couldn't see it. Laughter and cheers. Did you hear that? Says he saw the thing in the dark. He still says he saw the beastie. It came and went away again and came back and wanted to eat him. He was dreaming. Laughing, Ralph looked for confirmation round the ring of faces. The older boys agreed, but here and there among the little ones was the doubt that required more than rational assurance. He must have had a nightmare, stumbling about among those creepers. More grave nodding. They knew about nightmares. He says he saw the beastie, the snake thing, and will it come back tonight? But there isn't a beastie. He says in the morning it turned into them things like ropes in the trees and hung in the branches. He says will it come back tonight? But there isn't a beastie. There was no laughter at all now, and more grave watching. Ralph pushed both hands through his hair and looked at the little boy in mixed amusement and exasperation. Jack seized the conch. Ralph's right, of course. There isn't a snake thing. But if there was a snake, we'd hunt it and kill it. We're going to hunt pigs and get meat for everybody, and we'll look for the snake, too. But there isn't a snake. We'll make sure when we go hunting. Ralph was annoyed and, for the moment, defeated. He felt himself facing something ungraspable. The eyes that looked so intently at him were without humor. All right, let's talk for a minute. So the boys are kind of divided into the older boys, Ralph's age, like 11, 12, and the younger boys, like this boy with the mulberry birthmark. Mulberry is like a dark wine red. It's a birthmark that covers his face. And the little boys are afraid. They think they've seen what they're going to refer to as a beastie, which is more really the if you've seen a picture of a jungle, there's some vines and things hanging down from trees. So he's convinced himself that that's a beastie. And Piggy's speaking for him because the older boys have intimidated him by their laughter. But he's convinced himself that there is a beast. And Ralph is repeatedly saying, there's no beast. There's nothing here but us. And Jack, being Jack, does not help and takes the conch and says, well, there's nothing there, but if there was, we'll hunt it. So Jack has a bloodlust. He wants to hunt. He wants to kill. I'd say that's a bad quality for a leader. But he's not particularly helping the situation because even though they all say it's not true, he says, well, if it is, we're going to kill it, which kind of gives the beast a presence, even if it's not here, but it is here, and we'll take care of it. So this is not going to help in the future. And Ralph already feels defeated by this, and this just started. Let's continue. But there isn't a beast. Something he had not known was there rose in him and compelled him to make a point loudly and again. But I tell you there isn't a beast. The assembly was silent. Ralph lifted the conch again, and his good humor came back as he thought of what he had to say next. Now we come to the most important thing. I've been thinking. I was thinking while we were climbing the mountain. He flashed a conspiratorial grin at the other two. And on the beach just now. This is what I thought. We want to have fun, and we want to be rescued. The passionate noise of agreement from the assembly hit him like a wave, and he lost his thread. He thought again. We want to be rescued, and of course we shall be rescued. Voices babbled. The simple statement, unbacked by any proof but the weight of Ralph's new authority, brought light and happiness. He had to wave the conch before he could make them hear him. My father's in the Navy. He said there aren't any unknown islands left. He says the Queen has a big room full of maps and all the islands in the world are drawn there. So the Queen's got a picture of this island. Again came the sounds of cheerfulness and better heart. And sooner or later a ship will pull in here. It might even be Daddy's ship. So you see, sooner or later we shall be rescued. He paused with the point made. The assembly was lifted toward safety by his words. They liked and now respected him. Good quality. So he has a respect of the people on the island. Spontaneously, they began to clap, and presently the platform was loud with applause. Ralph flushed, looking sideways at Piggy, no open admiration, looking sideways at Piggy's open admiration, and then the other way at Jack, who was smirking and showing that he too knew how to clap. Ralph waved the conch. Shut up. Wait, listen. He went on in the silence, borne on his triumph. There's another thing. We can help them to find us. If a ship comes near the island, they may not notice us, so we must make smoke on top of the mountain. We must make a fire. A fire! Make a fire! At once half the boys were on their feet. Jack clambered among them, the conch forgotten. Come on, follow me! The space under the palm trees was full of noise and movement. Ralph was on his feet, too, shouting for quiet, but no one heard him. All at once the crowd swayed toward the island and was gone, following Jack. Even the tiny children went and did their best among the leaves and broken branches. Ralph was left holding the conch with no one but Piggy. Piggy's breathing was quite restored. Like kids, he said scornfully, acting like a crowd of kids. Ralph looked at him doubtfully and laid the conch on the tree trunk. I bet it's gone tea time, said Piggy. What do they think? What do they think they're going to do on that mountain? He caressed the shell respectfully, then stopped and looked up. Ralph, hey, where are you going? Ralph was already clambering over the first smashed swaths of the scar. A long way ahead of them was crashing and laughter. So we have some chaos. Ralph says we need to make a fire, and without any plan, Jack, of course, takes that lead and excites the boys, and they all run away in a fury up the mountain. And Piggy and Ralph are left behind. Ralph sets down the shell, that civilization, that symbol of civilization, and as Piggy is here, like, oh my god, they're acting so mature, a bunch of kids, which they are, Ralph kind of gives in and runs to meet up with the boys. So Piggy is left. Piggy is the one left behind. Piggy watched him in disgust, like a crowd of kids. He sighed, bent and laced up his shoes. The noise of the errant assembly faded up the mountain. Then, with the martyred expression of a parent who has to keep up with the senseless jubilance of the children, he picked up the conch, turned toward the forest, and began to pick his way over the tumbled scar. So he kind of gives up and just follows along, which could be a negative quality for him. He, doesn't really speak up for himself. He gives in very easily. Below the other side of the mountaintop was a platform of forest. Once more, Ralph found himself making the cupping gesture. Down there we could get as much wood as we want. Jack nodded and pulled at his underlip. Starting perhaps 100 feet below them on the steeper side of the mountain, the patch might have been designed expressly for fuel. Trees, forced by the damp heat, found too little soil for full growth, fell early and decayed. Creepers cradled them, and new saplings searched a way up. Jack turned to the choir, who stood ready. Their black caps of maintenance were slid over one ear like barrettes. We'll build a pile. Come on. They found the likeliest path down and began tugging at the dead wood. And the small boys who had reached the top came sliding too, till everyone but Piggy was busy. Most of the wood was so rotten that when they pulled it, it broke up in a shower of fragments and wood lice and decay. But some trunks came out in one piece. The twins, Sam and Eric, were the first to get a likely log, but they could do nothing till Ralph, Jack, Simon, Roger, and Maurice found room for a handhold. Then they inched the grotesque dead thing up the rock and toppled it over on top. Each party of boys added a quota, less or more, and the pile grew. At the return, Ralph found himself alone on a limb with Jack, and they grinned at each other, sharing this burden. Once more, amid the breeze, the shouting and slanting sunlight and the high mountain was shed that glamour, that strange invisible light of friendship, adventure, and content. So it's again showing, Golding, the author, is showing that right now Ralph and Jack are kind of building a friendship. Almost too heavy, Jack grinned back. Not for the two of us. Together, joined in an effort by the burden, they staggered up the last steep of the mountain. Together they chanted, 1, 2, 3, and crashed the log on the great pile. Then they stepped back, laughing with triumphant pleasure, so that immediately Ralph had to stand on his head. Below them, boys were still laboring, though some of the small ones had lost interest and were searching this new forest for fruit. Now the twins, with unsuspected intelligence, came up the mountain with armfuls of dried leaves and dumped them against the pile. One by one, as they sensed that the pile was complete, the boys stopped going back for more and stood, with the pink shattered top of the mountain around them. Breath came evenly by now, and sweat dried. Ralph and Jack looked at each other, while society paused about them. The shameful knowledge grew in them, and they did not know how to begin confession. Ralph spoke first, crimson in the face. Will you? He cleared his throat and went on. Will you light the fire? Now the absurd situation was open. Jack blushed too. He began to mutter vaguely. You rub 2 sticks, you rub... So they're both... This humongous pile of wood and kindling has been made, and they're both realizing that nobody knows how to start the fire. He glanced at Ralph, who blurted out the last confession of incompetence. Has anyone got any matches? You make a bow and spin the arrow, said Roger. He rubbed his hands in mine. Psh, psh. A little air was moving over the mountain. Piggy came with it, in shorts and shirt, laboring cautiously out of the forest with an evening sunlight gleaming from his glasses. He held the conch under his arm. Ralph shouted at him, Piggy, have you got any matches? The other boys took up a cry till the mountain rang. Piggy shook his head and came to the pile. My, you've made a big heap, haven't you? Jack pointed suddenly. His specs! Use them as burning glasses! Piggy was surrounded before he could back away. Here, let me go! His voice rose to a shriek of terror as Jack snatched the glasses off his face. Mind out! Give 'em back! I can hardly see. You'll break the conch. Ralph elbowed him to one side and knelt by the pile. Stand out of the light. So Piggy walks up the mountain, and Jack realizes they can use Piggy's glasses to start the fire, but didn't ask him, just surrounded him and snatched him off his face. There was pushing and pulling and officious cries. Ralph moved the lenses back and forth, this way and that, till a glossy white image of the declining sun lay on the piece of rotten wood. Almost at once a thin trickle of smoke rose up and made him cough. Jack knelt too and blew gently, so that the smoke drifted away, thickening, and a tiny flame appeared. The flame, nearly invisible at first in that bright sunlight, enveloped a small twig, grew, was enriched with color, and reached up to a branch which exploded with a sharp crack. The flame flapped higher, and the boys broke into a cheer. My specs! Howled Piggy. Give me my specs! Ralph stood away from the pile and put the glasses into Piggy's groping hands. His voice subsided to a mutter. Just blurs, all that. Hardly see my hand. The boys were dancing. The pile was so rotten, and now so tinder-dry, the whole limbs yielded passionately to the yellow flames that poured upward and shook a great beard of flame 20 feet in the air. 4 yards round the fire, the heat was like a blow, and the breeze was a river of sparks. Trunks crumbled into white dust. Ralph shouted, More wood! All of you, get more wood! Life became a race with the fire, and the boys scattered through the upper forest. To keep a clean flag of flame flying on the mountain was the immediate end, and no one looked farther. Even the smallest boys, unless fruit claimed them, brought little pieces of wood and threw them in. The air moved a little faster and became a light wind, so that leeward and windward side were clearly differentiated. On one side the air was cool, but on the other the fire thrust out a savage arm of heat and crinkled air out in an instant. Boys who felt the evening wind on their damp faces paused to enjoy the freshness of it, and then found they were exhausted. They flung themselves down on the shadows that lay among the shuttered rocks. The beard of flame diminished quickly, then the pile fell inwards with a soft, cindery sound and sent a great tree of sparks upward, that leaned away and drifted downward. The boys lay, panting like dogs. Ralph raised his head of his forearms. That was no good. Roger spat efficiently into the hot dust. What do you mean? There wasn't any smoke, only flame. Piggy had settled himself in a space between two rocks and sat with the conch on his knees. "We haven't made a fire," he said. "What's any use? We couldn't keep a fire like that going if we tried." So I don't know if any of you have tried to light a fire, like a campfire, but um, it's hard to keep it going if you don't have the right type of wood. If it's too wet, if it's too dry, the fire will burn brightly for a minute and then die, and that's what's happening right now. Also, you can't suffocate the fire by putting too much on it. "A fat lot you tried," said Jack contemptuously. "You just sat." "We used his specs," said Simon, smearing a black cheek with his forearm. "He helped that way." "I got the conch," said Piggy indignantly. "You let me speak." "The conch doesn't count on top of the mountain," said Jack, "so you shut up." "I got the conch in my hand." "Put on green branches," said Maurice. "That's the best way to make smoke." "I got the conch." Jack turned fiercely. "You shut up." Piggy wilted. Ralph took the conch from him and looked around the circle of boys. So yet again we have Jack refusing to follow the rules of the conch and Piggy being bullied into silence. Again, as he's the only intelligent one speaking. We've got to have special people for looking after the fire. Any day there may be a ship out there. He waved his arm at the taut wire of the horizon. "And if we have a signal going, they'll come and take us off. And another thing, we ought to have more rules. Where the conch is, that's a meeting, the same up here as down there." They assented. Piggy opened his mouth to speak, caught Jack's eye, and shut it again. Jack held out his hands for the conch and stood up, holding the delicate thing carefully to his sooty hands. "I agree with Ralph. We've got to have rules and obey them. After all, we're not savages. We're English, and the English are the best at everything, so we've got to do the right things." Ironically, this is Jack just saying this, that he agrees with Piggy after he just that he agrees with Ralph after Ralph just repeated what Piggy said, and he told Piggy to shut up. He turned to Ralph. "Ralph, I'll split up the choir, my hunters, that is, into groups, and we'll be responsible for keeping the fire going." This generosity brought a spatter of applause from the boys, so that Jack grinned at them, then waved the conch for silence. "We'll let the fire burn now. Who would see smoke at night time anyways? And we can start the fire again whenever we like. Altos, you can keep the fire going this week. The altos, and the trebles the next," the assembly asserted gravely. "And we'll be responsible for keeping a lookout, too. If we see a ship out there," they followed the direction of his bony arm with their eyes. We'll put green branches on. Then there'll be no smoke. Then there'll be more smoke." They gazed intently at the dense blue of the horizon, as if a little silhouette might appear there any moment. The sun in the west was a drop of burning gold that slid nearer and nearer the sill of the world. All at once they were aware of the evening as the end of the light and warmth. Roger took the conch and looked around at them gloomily. "I've been watching the sea. There hasn't been any trace of a ship. Perhaps we'll never be rescued." A murmur rose and swept away. Ralph took back the conch. "I said before we'll be rescued sometime. We just got to wait, that's all." Daring, indignant, Piggy took the conch. "That's what I said. I said about our meetings and things, and then you said shut up." His voice lifted to a whine of virtuous recrimination. They stirred and began to shout him down. "You said you wanted a small fire, and you been and built the pile like a hayrick. If I say anything," cried Piggy with bitter realism, "you say shut up. But if Jack or Maurice or Simon—" He paused in the tumult, standing, looking beyond them and down the unfriendly side of the mountain to the great patch where they had found dead wood. Then he laughed, so strangely that they were hushed, looking at the flush of his spectacles in astonishment. They followed his gaze to find the sour joke. "You got your small fire all right." Smoke was rising here and there among the creepers that festooned the dead or dying trees. So Piggy was defending himself, and then he looked forward and he noticed that the fire that they thought was dead had actually just spread down the side of the mountain and has become a wildfire. As they watched, a flash of fire appeared at the root of one wisp, and then the smoke thickened. Small flames stirred at the trunk of a tree and crawled away through leaves and brushwood, dividing and increasing. One patch touched a tree trunk and scrambled up like a bright squirrel. The smoke increased, sifted, rolled outwards. The squirrel leapt out of the wings of the wind and clung to another standing tree, eating downward. Beneath the dark canopy of leaves, the fire laid hold of the forest and began to gnaw. Acres of black and yellow smoke rolled steadily toward the sea. So now it's become a huge fire. At the sight of the flames and the irresistible course of the fire, the boys broke into a shrill, exciting cheering. The flames, as though they were a kind of wildfire, crept as a jaguar creeps on its belly toward the line of birch-like saplings that fledged an outcrop of the pink rock. They flapped at the first of the trees, and the branches grew a brief foliage of fire. The heart of flame leapt nimbly across the gap between the trees, and then went swinging and flaring along the whole row of them. Beneath the capering boys, a quarter of a mile square of forest was savage with smoke and flame. The separate noises of the fire merged into a drum roll and seemed to shake the mountain. "You've caught your small fire, all right." Startled, Ralph realized that the boys were falling still and silent, feeling the beginning of awe at the powers set free below them. The knowledge of the awe made him savage. "Oh, shut up!" "I got the conch," said Piggy in a hurt voice. "I got a right to speak." They looked at him with eyes that lacked interest in what they saw, and cocked ears at the drum roll of the fire. Piggy glanced nervously into hell and cradled the conch. "We've got to let that burn out now. And that was our firewood." He licked his lips. "There ain't nothing we can do. We ought to be more careful. I'm scared." Jack dragged his eyes away from the fire. "You're always scared, you fatty." "I've got the conch," said Piggy bleakly. He turned to Ralph. "I got the conch, ain't I, Ralph?" Unwillingly, Ralph turned away from the splendid, awful sight. "What's that?" "The conch. I got a right to speak." The twins giggled together. "We wanted smoke. Now look." A pall stretched for miles away from the island. All the boys except Piggy started to giggle. Presently they were shrieking with laughter. Piggy lost his temper. "I got the conch. Just you listen. The first thing we ought to have made was shelters down there by the beach. It wasn't half cold down there in the night. But the first time Ralph says fire, you goes howling and screaming up this here mountain, like a pack of kids." By now they were listening to the tirade. "How can you expect to be rescued if you don't put first things first and act proper?" He took off his glasses and made as if to put down the conch, but the sudden motion toward it of most of the older boys changed his mind. He tucked the shell under his arm and crouched back on the rock. "Then when you get here you build a bonfire that isn't no use. Now you bend and set the whole island on fire. Won't we look funny if the whole island burns up? Cooked fruit. That's what we'll have to eat, and roast pork. All that's nothing to laugh at. You said Ralph was chief, and you don't give him time to think. Then when he says something, you rush off, like... He paused for breath, and the fire growled at them. "And that's not all. Them kids, the little uns, who took any notice of 'em? Who knows how many we got?" Ralph took a sudden step forward. I told you to get a list of names." "How could I?" cried Piggy indignantly. "All by myself." They waited for 2 minutes, and then they fell in the sea. They went to the forest. They just scattered everywhere. How was I to know which was which?" Ralph licked pale lips. "Then you don't know how many of us there ought to be." "How could I, with the little ones running around like insects? Then when you three came back, as soon as you said to make a fire, they all ran away, and I never had a chance." "That's enough," said Ralph sharply, and snatched back the conch. "If you didn't, you didn't." "Then you come up here and pinch my specs." Jack turned on him. "You shut up." "And them little uns was wandering around down there where the fire is. How do you know they ain't still there?" Piggy stood up and pointed to the smoke and flames. A murmur rose among the boys and died away. Something strange was happening to Piggy, for he was gasping for breath. "The little one," gasped Piggy. "Him with the mark on his face. I don't see him. Where is he now?" The crowd was silent as death. Him that talked about the snakes. He was down there. A tree exploded in the fire like a bomb. Tall swaths of creepers rose for a moment into view, agonized, and went down again. The little boys screamed at them. Snakes! Snakes! Look at the snakes! In the west, and unheated, the sun lay into an inch or two above the sea. Their faces were lit redly from beneath. Piggy fell against a rock and clutched it with both hands. The little one that had the mark on his face. Where is he now? I tell you, I don't see him. The boys looked at each other fearfully, unbelieving. Where is he now? Ralph muttered the reply as if in shame. Perhaps he went back to the beneath them on the unfriendly side of the mountain. The drum roll continued. That was the end of chapter 2. And they have lost the little boy with the birthmark in the fire. So he is gone. I would like you to add a couple more instances of your savagery and civilization, at least give me 2 more of each, and then leadership qualities. But if you look back at the worksheet where you wrote the new rule, and look down where it says the beastie, what is the beastie according to Little Ones' descriptions? Little Ones is what they're going to call the little ones. That's just their slang. And then they're going to call the big ones the biggins. So the biggins and the little ones. And please answer these on a separate sheet of paper. We already went over that one, though. What was the beastie according to the description? What effect does a child's story about the beastie have on the group? So at first, the older boys are like, it doesn't exist, but then it creates a sort of excitement and savage reaction, especially from Jack's group, and it creates a fear among the little ones. What evidence of the real beastie have we seen so far, i.e., what has been described using terms suggestive of a monster? I'm going to leave that one to you. Just look for suggestions of a monstrous, either person or item, if there is any. And then what happens to the boy with the mulberry birthmark on his face, and what might this indicate? So again, what happens and is his disappearance, and what is suggested is the reason behind his disappearance. Look at the descriptions of the fire. Make a list of short quotes. What do these unusual descriptions suggest? The fire is described almost in humanistic qualities. Also some personification, etc. So look at some of the descriptions of this wildfire. And then what is the suggestion in those descriptions? Okay, so that was chapter 1 and chapter 2. If you have any questions about the reading or your answers and you need to contact me, you know how. But good luck, and chapter 3 will come early next week sometime. Hope you are all doing well, and remember your research paper is due next week. Very important to get that. And your peer reviews. Send me a picture of those peer reviews. I need a digital copy of your research paper. I will be, the sooner you get them to me, the sooner I grade them, and you'll know where you stand as far as graduation. So get those to me ASAP. Enjoy your weekend. Take care of yourselves. Stay healthy. And hopefully we'll see you soon.